The sun cast long shadows over Salvation Springs as a single gunshot shattered the dawn silence. 3 bodies lay sprawled in the dust of Devil's Gulch, their blood darkening the thirsty earth. Above them stood a woman in black, her red hair catching the dying light like fire. Folks would later say that the most dangerous predator in Salvation Springs wasn't the rattlers or the coyotes. It was the widow who ran the boarding house on the edge of town. But nobody believed that. Not until the day the Scorpion brothers came riding in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hawthorne's day began like any other, with the methodical precision that had become her armor. The boarding house she ran stood at the edge of Salvation Springs, a testament to order in a lawless land. Every morning she'd polish the brass doorknobs until they gleamed, sweep the wooden porch until it shone, and serve breakfast to her boarders with a quiet efficiency that revealed nothing of who she truly was. The routine was her sanctuary, each task a brick in the wall she'd built between her past and present. The late summer air hung heavy with the promise of change, carrying the scent of sage and sun-baked earth through the open windows. Rebecca stood on her porch, watching the town come to life through eyes that missed nothing. Her simple black dress and carefully pinned red hair marked her as a respectable widow, but there was something else in her bearing, something that spoke of a different life, buried, but not forgotten. The way she moved, the way her eyes constantly scanned her surroundings, told a story different from the one she presented to the world. "Morning, Mrs. Hawthorne," Pearl Sullivan called out as she hurried past with supplies for her general store. "Will you be joining us for the church social this Sunday?" Pearl's enthusiasm barely masked her pity, the same pity Rebecca saw in most townsfolk's eyes when they looked at the poor widow who'd arrived 3 years ago. Rebecca's smile was polite but distant, practiced to perfection. "Thank you kindly, Pearl, but I've got boarders to tend to." The same answer she'd given every Sunday for 3 years, ever since she'd arrived in Salvation Springs with nothing but a small trunk and secrets heavy enough to sink a soul. The trunk remained locked beneath her bed, its contents untouched but never forgotten. Inside the boarding house, memories lurked in every shadow. The mantelpiece held 2 items she never touched but always watched: a wedding band hanging from a silver chain and a sepia photograph of Wesley Hawthorne, her dead husband. His kind eyes seemed to follow her as she moved through her morning routine, serving coffee to the traveling salesman, eggs to the elderly couple, and fresh bread to the young schoolteacher who always blushed when she passed his table. Each guest received the same measured attention, like pieces on a chessboard she'd learned to navigate with careful precision. Martha Doc Whitaker sat at her usual place in the kitchen, watching Rebecca knead bread dough with hands that once knew the weight of a Colt point, for 5 better than a rolling pin. The morning light caught the silver strands in Martha's dark hair, marking the years they'd known each other. Years filled with unspoken understanding and carefully guarded secrets. 3 years you've been running this boarding house, Rebecca," Martha said, her coffee cooling forgotten before her. "Don't you ever think about—" "About what, Martha?" Rebecca's voice cut through the air like a knife. "About before. That life's dead and buried." Her hands worked the dough with increasing force, each movement betraying the tension she usually kept hidden. "Along with your husband?" Martha's words were gentle but probing. "Rebecca, Wesley wouldn't have wanted—" "Wesley's not here to want anything." Rebecca's hands stilled in the dough. "And that woman he married? She died with him." The words hung in the air like gunsmoke, heavy with unspoken grief and harder truths. The conversation died as shouts erupted from outside. Both women moved to the window, watching as 3 riders approached from the east, their horses kicking up dust clouds that blotted out the morning sun. Rebecca's hand moved unconsciously to her right thigh, where a gun belt used to rest, muscle memory betraying years of careful pretense. The movement didn't escape Martha's notice, but the doctor remained silent, understanding more than most the cost of speaking certain truths aloud. "More travelers for your boarding house?" Martha asked, but Rebecca was already shaking her head, her face set in lines Martha hadn't seen in years. No. Her voice had changed, grown harder, colder. Those aren't travelers. She recognized the type. Men who wore violence like others wore Sunday clothes, comfortable in its familiar fit. The Scorpion brothers rode into Salvation Springs like a storm rolling down from Thunder Ridge. Their reputation preceded them, whispered in saloons and telegraph offices across 3 territories. People hurried inside at their approach, doors slammed shut, and shutters closed with the finality of coffin lids. But in her kitchen, Rebecca Hawthorne stood straight and still, watching. For a moment, her carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing something beneath, something dangerous and eternal, like steel catching sunlight. Marshal Wyatt Flint McCullough rode past on his morning patrol, his eyes meeting Rebecca's through the window. A look of understanding passed between them, heavy with shared knowledge and unspoken warnings. He was one of the few who knew what lay beneath her widow's weeds, one of the few who remembered the woman she used to be. His hand rested casually on his holster as he passed the newcomers, marking them, measuring them, just as she did from her window. As the dust settled around the Scorpion brothers' horses, Rebecca turned back to her bread dough, her movements precise and controlled. But something had changed in the air of Salvation Springs, something that whispered of violence to come. "So it begins again," she murmured, and in those words lay the weight of a past about to catch up with her present. The shadow of Thunder Ridge stretched across the town like a warning, and in her immaculate boarding house, Rebecca Ember Hawthorne prepared herself for what she knew was coming. She'd buried her old life once, along with her husband. But some things refused to stay buried, and some women refused to be victims twice. The time was coming when Salvation Springs would learn why they called her Ember, because even the smallest spark can ignite an inferno. The Scorpion brothers didn't waste time making their presence known in Salvation Springs. By noon, their laughter echoed from the saloon, sharp and dangerous as broken glass. Caleb, the eldest, sat with his back to the wall, eyes constantly moving, cataloging every detail of his surroundings. Jebediah Rattler nursed his whiskey at the bar, while Ezra, the youngest, amused himself by making the piano player perform with a gun trained on his trembling hands. The old man's fingers stumbled over the keys, each wrong note drawing snickers from the youngest Scorpion. Rebecca watched from her boarding house window as Luther Coyote Dawson, their enforcer, led their horses to the livery stable. His movements were deliberate, professional, a man who knew his trade well. She recognized the way he walked, the same way she used to move before she buried that life under widow's weeds and respectability. The way his eyes swept the street, noting escape routes and vantage points, told her more about him than any wanted poster could. "They're staying," Martha observed from behind her, voice tight with concern. The doctor's weathered hands clutched her medical bag, knuckles white with tension. "Yes." Rebecca's response was clipped, her fingers absently touching the hidden pocket in her skirts where she kept a small derringer, a habit she'd never quite broken. "They always do, once they find a town worth bleeding dry, like wolves finding a flock without a shepherd." The afternoon stretched long and tense, like a drawn bowstring waiting for release. Rebecca went about her usual routine, changing linens, preparing dinner for her boarders, keeping the accounts in her precise handwriting. But beneath every mundane action lay a current of anticipation, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. Her other boarders had picked up on the tension. The traveling salesman made excuses to leave early, while the elderly couple locked themselves in their room, speaking in whispers. It was just past sunset when the first shot rang out, splitting the evening air like summer lightning. Rebecca was in her kitchen, kneading dough for tomorrow's bread, when she heard the commotion. Shouting from the street, then the sound of breaking glass from Pearl Sullivan's general store. She wiped her hands clean, moved to the window, and watched as Ezra Scorpion stumbled out of the store, laughing, a bottle of expensive whiskey in his hand. Pearl followed him to the door, her face flushed with anger, her normally neat gray hair coming loose from its pins. "You have to pay for that." Pearl's voice carried across the street. "This isn't some lawless territory. We have rules here. Civilization." Ezra turned, his young face twisted into something ugly. "Oh? And who's gonna make me? That tired old marshal?" He took a long drink from the bottle, then hurled it against the store's front wall, sending glass shards glittering in the dying light. The sound of breaking glass seemed to echo off Thunder Ridge itself. Rebecca's hands clenched at her sides, remembering other men, other towns, other moments when civilization hung by a thread. She watched as Marshal McCullough emerged from his office, moving with deliberate slowness. The leather of his holster creaked with each step, the sound carrying in the sudden silence that had fallen over the street. But before he could reach the scene, Caleb Scorpion appeared, placing himself between his younger brother and the law. "There seems to be some misunderstanding." Caleb's voice was smooth as oil on water. "We'll be happy to pay for any damages." He flicked a coin toward Pearl, the gold catching the last rays of sunlight. "That should cover it, with interest." The coin landed in the dust at Pearl's feet, an insult masked as restitution. The marshal's hand hadn't moved from his gun. "Money's not the point, Scorpion. This is a peaceful town. We like it that way." His eyes, hard as flint, never left Caleb's face. "And we're peaceful men," Caleb smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "When treated with respect." The threat in his words hung in the air like gunsmoke. Rebecca saw it then, the slight nod Caleb gave to someone behind the marshal. Luther Coyote Dawson had positioned himself in the shadows of the undertaker's shop, his hand hovering near his holster. One wrong move, and Salvation Springs would have a dead marshal on its hands. The town would fall, like so many others, becoming just another conquest for men who fed on fear. Without conscious thought, Rebecca found herself moving. She stepped out onto her porch, the evening air cool against her face. Her black dress whispered, against the wooden boards. The sound carrying memories of another life, another woman who wouldn't stand by while violence took root. "Gentlemen," her voice carried across the street, clear and commanding. "If you're looking for lodging, I have rooms available at my boarding house." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. All eyes turned to her. She felt Caleb Scorpion's gaze like a physical touch, assessing, measuring. She kept her posture relaxed, her face pleasant, the widow offering Christian charity to travelers. But inside, old instincts stirred, reading the positions of every man in the street, noting angles, distances, lines of fire. She could feel the weight of her derringer pressing against her thigh like a reminder of who she used to be. "Well now," Caleb's smile widened as he turned fully toward her. "That's mighty hospitable of you, Mrs. Hawthorne, Rebecca Hawthorne." She inclined her head slightly. "Clean beds, hot meals, and reasonable rates, provided my house rules are respected." Each word was carefully chosen, a gambit in a game she'd played before. Ezra laughed, the sound harsh in the gathering dusk. "House rules? In a dump like this?" "Shut up, Ezra." Caleb's voice carried a warning edge. He studied Rebecca for a moment longer, then nodded. "We'd be obliged, Mrs. Hawthorne. My brothers and I appreciate civilization's comforts." The way he said civilization made it sound like a joke. Rebecca maintained her smile as they gathered their belongings and approached her boarding house. Marshal McCullough caught her eye, a question in his gaze. She gave him the slightest shake of her head. This was her choice, her gambit. Better to have them under her roof, where she could watch them, than leaving them free to terrorize the town. As she showed the Scorpion brothers to their rooms, Rebecca felt the weight of their presence like a storm cloud above her carefully ordered world. She'd seen their type before, in another life. Men who confused courtesy with weakness, who saw kindness as an invitation to cruelty. Their boots left mud on her clean floors, a small desecration that promised larger ones to come. "Dinner's at 6, she informed them, her voice neutral. No weapons at the table, no smoking in the rooms, and no disturbing the other guests. "Or what?" Ezra challenged, leaning against the doorframe with calculated insolence. His spurs jingled as he shifted, a sound like rattling bones. Rebecca met his gaze, letting her mask slip just enough to show him something in her eyes that made him straighten up. "Or you'll find other accommodations." The steel in her voice wasn't entirely hidden now, and she saw recognition flicker across Caleb's face. A predator recognizing another of its kind. Later, as she locked up for the night, Rebecca heard Martha's quiet footsteps behind her. "You're playing a dangerous game," the doctor warned, her voice barely above a whisper. "No game," Rebecca replied, checking the lock one final time. "Just keeping my enemies close." She touched the derringer in her pocket, a habit born of hard experience, and preparing for when they show their true nature. The night settled over Salvation Springs like a dark blanket, but few slept easily. Above the town, Thunder Ridge stood silent against the star-filled sky, as if waiting to witness what tomorrow would bring. In her room, Rebecca sat in the darkness, listening to the heavy footsteps of the Scorpion brothers in the rooms above, and remembered another night when she'd waited in darkness, gun in hand, for violence to find her. Dawn broke over Salvation Springs with an angry red sky, painting Thunder Ridge in colors of blood and fire. Rebecca stood at her kitchen window, watching the sun rise while her hands mechanically worked bread dough. She hadn't slept, the weight of the Scorpion brothers' presence above her keeping rest at bay. The floorboards had creaked well past midnight, their boots pacing like caged animals. The morning brought an uneasy quiet to her boarding house. The elderly couple had checked out at first light, leaving money on their dresser rather than risk a face-to-face encounter with their new fellow boarders. The traveling salesman had vanished even earlier, his room key left on the front desk without a word. Only the young schoolteacher remained, his face pale as he hurried through breakfast. Clearing out like rats from a sinking ship, Caleb Scorpion's voice came from behind her, smooth as a snake's scales. Rebecca didn't startle. She'd heard his footsteps on the stairs, counting the rhythm of his approach. "Most folks prefer quiet company," she replied, not turning from her work. Her fingers kept kneading, though every nerve in her body screamed at having him at her back. "Quiet can be overrated, Mrs. Hawthorne." He moved closer, and she could smell tobacco and gun oil on him. "Sometimes a little excitement is just what a town needs, especially a town like this with such interesting residents." Rebecca's hands stilled in the dough. "Interesting?" She could hear the smile in his voice. "Take yourself, for instance, a widow running a boarding house all alone. It must be difficult managing everything by yourself. Never know what kind of trouble might come calling." The threat lay under his words, like a rattler under a rock. Rebecca resumed kneading, her movements measured. "I manage well enough, Mr. Scorpion. Coffee's hot if you want it." He chuckled, the sound dark as storm clouds. "You know, the thing about widows is, they're often in need of protection. Dangerous times we live in." "Indeed, they are." Rebecca turned then, wiping her hands on her apron. She met his gaze steadily, letting none of her thoughts show on her face. "Though some dangers are more obvious than others." Before he could respond, shouts erupted from the street. Both of them moved to the window, watching as Ezra Scorpion squared off against young Deputy Thaddeus Crawford outside the saloon. The morning sun caught the deputy's badge, making it shine like a target. "Your brother seems eager for excitement," Rebecca observed quietly. "Ezra's young," Caleb replied, his tone dismissive. "Hot-blooded. Sometimes it needs teaching about respect." But he made no move to intervene, as his youngest brother continued to bait the deputy. Rebecca watched the scene unfold, her heart turning to ice as she recognized the setup. Ezra, playing drunk and belligerent, keeping the deputy's attention. Jebediah, Rattler, positioned himself casually to the side, one hand resting near his gun, and Luther Dawson, moving through the shadows of the alley behind Crawford, silent as death. She knew their kind, and had seen their work before. They'd start small, a deputy, first, then perhaps the marshal. Once the law was gone, they'd own the town. Pearl's store, Josiah Winchester's bank, every business would pay for protection. Those who refused would have accidents. She'd seen it happen in 3 towns during her previous life before she'd met Wesley and found a different path. Wesley? The thought of him sent a familiar pain through her chest. He'd believed in law and civilization and building something better than the world of violence she'd known. And she'd believed in him, let him show her another way to live. Until the day 3 men like the Scorpions had taken it all away. The sound of a gunshot cracked through her memories. Deputy Crawford lay in the dust, clutching his shoulder, while Ezra stood over him laughing. The boy's first kill, Rebecca realized, watching his face. The moment when a man first learns he can take life and face no consequences. Shame, Caleb said beside her, his voice carrying no shame at all. Boy should have shown more respect. Rebecca's fingers found the derringer in her pocket, an old friend offering cold comfort. Your brother shot an officer of the law. Self-defense, Caleb shrugged. Everyone saw the deputy draw first. Didn't they, Mrs. Hawthorne? She turned to face him fully then, letting her mask slip just enough to show him what lay beneath. I saw nothing, Mr. Scorpion. I was too busy thinking about protection, and who truly needs it in these dangerous times. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or warning. He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy and left her kitchen, his spurs jingling a deadly promise. When Martha arrived an hour later to tend to the deputy's wound, she found Rebecca sitting at her kitchen table, staring at the wedding band that normally hung on the mantel. The silver chain pooled around it like a snake. They're not leaving, Martha said quietly, setting her medical bag down. Not until they've bled this town dry. No, Rebecca agreed, her voice distant. They're not leaving. She picked up the wedding band, feeling its weight in her palm. But someone is. Martha's breath caught. Rebecca. The woman who wears black and bakes bread died the moment they shot that boy. Rebecca stood, her movement liquid, predatory, a glimpse of who she'd been before Wesley. Time for the other one to wake up. There's no coming back from that path, Martha warned. Not this time. Rebecca slipped the ring onto her finger, feeling the familiar metal like a key unlocking a door she'd kept sealed for years. I'm not looking to come back. She moved to the window, watching as Ezra and his brothers celebrated at the saloon. Just to finish something that should have been finished long ago. Above the town, Thunder Ridge caught the midday sun, its shadow reaching toward Salvation Springs, like judgment. Rebecca felt the weight of the derringer in her pocket, and for the first time in 3 years, she let herself remember every lesson, every skill, every death she dealt before Wesley had shown her another way. Her widow's weeds suddenly felt like a costume, a disguise she'd worn too long. The time for masks was ending. The woman who'd been born in violence and baptized in gunsmoke was stirring, and Salvation Springs would soon learn why they'd once called her Ember, because she could burn everything to ash when the wind was right. Rebecca rode out of Salvation Springs as the moon rose over Thunder Ridge, her black dress exchanged for riding clothes she'd kept buried in an old trunk. The derringer was no longer hidden in her pocket, but strapped openly to her thigh, a companion she'd neglected too long. Her horse's hooves kicked up dust that glittered in the moonlight as she followed the old mining trail toward Whiskey Creek. Marshal McCullough had given her the information she needed, his words careful but pointed during their brief encounter behind the livery stable. Man, you're looking for camps up by the old silver mine, he'd said, not asking why she needed to know. Rides with 2 others. Used to work with the Scorpions before going his own way, if anyone knows their weaknesses. The trail grew steeper as she climbed, the air turning thin and sharp in her lungs. Rebecca remembered another night ride 3 years ago, fleeing rather than hunting. She'd been a different woman then, running from the violence that had claimed Wesley. Now she was riding toward it, deliberate as a bullet finding its mark. The camp appeared exactly where McCullough said it would be, a small fire marking its location like a fallen star. 2 horses were tethered nearby, their shapes dark against the mountainside. Rebecca dismounted quietly, leading her horse the last 100 yards. As she approached, a voice cut through the darkness. "That's close enough unless you're looking to die tonight." Rebecca recognized the voice, older, rougher, but unmistakable. "Hello, Jackson," she called softly. "Still jumping in the shadows?" A pause, then the sound of movement. A figure emerged from the darkness, rifle lowered but ready. Augustus Jackson stood like a ghost from her past, his face weathered as old leather, his eyes sharp as obsidian under the brim of his hat. "Well, I'll be damned," he breathed. "Little Emily Ember Reeves. Though I hear it's Rebecca Hawthorne now." It was. Rebecca stepped into the firelight. "Not anymore." Jackson studied her for a long moment, then gestured toward the fire. "Suppose you better sit down and tell me what brings Wesley Hawthorne's widow up my mountain in the middle of the night." The fire cast dancing shadows as Rebecca explained about the Scorpion brothers, about Deputy Crawford, about the familiar pattern of violence taking root in Salvation Springs. Jackson listened without interruption, occasionally stoking the fire with a stick that had been worn smooth by years of use. "So," he said finally, "you're looking to get back in the game. After all, your husband talks about civilization and redemption. Wesley's dead." Rebecca's voice was flat. "Along with his dreams of civilization, the world's still tooth and claw, Jackson. I was a fool to pretend otherwise." "Maybe." Jackson pulled a bottle from his saddlebag, took a drink, and passed it to her. "Or maybe you were right to try for something better. The question is, what are you really after, justice or just revenge? Does it matter? Matters more than you think." Jackson's voice took on the tone she remembered from years ago when he'd first taught her to shoot. Revenge is a quick draw and a faster trigger. Justice, that takes patience, precision, the kind of skill that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. Rebecca took a long drink from the bottle, letting the whiskey burn away the taste of bread flour and respectability. "I remember who I was, Jackson. Who I am." "Do you?" He leaned forward, firelight carving deep shadows in his face. "The Emily I knew was wild, reckless, shot first and counted the bodies later, but this..." He gestured at her. "This is something different. 3 years of playing widow has changed you, whether you admit it or not." "Changed me into what?" "Maybe into someone who can do what needs doing without losing herself in the process." Jackson stood, moving to his saddlebags. "The Scorpions, they're not just thugs. Caleb's smart, calculating. He'll expect the old Emily, all fire and fury, but a woman who's learned patience, who knows both sides of the line between civilization and savagery." He pulled out a gun belt, the leather dark with age and use. Rebecca recognized it immediately. The rig she'd worn in her days riding with Jackson's crew. The Colt .45 still sat in its holster, maintained despite years of disuse. "Keep it clean," Jackson said quietly. "Just in case you ever needed reminding of who you were, who you could be." Rebecca stood, her fingers trailing over the familiar leather. "I can't go back to that life, Jackson." "No," he agreed. "But maybe you can take the best parts of both lives. The skill, the precision of who you were, the patience, the judgment of who you've become." He held out the gun belt. "The question is, are you ready to be both women at once?" The weight of the gun belt felt like coming home as she buckled it around her waist. The Colt sat differently than her Derringer, not hidden, but declared. A statement of intent. "The Scorpions have to be stopped," she said, "before they destroy everything Wesley believed in, everything I've built." Jackson nodded slowly. Then let's see if you remember how to dance with the devil without becoming one. He moved toward the fire's edge, into the shadows. Show me your draw. Let's see what 3 years of kneading bread has done to your speed. Rebecca's hand found the Colt's grip, familiar as a lover's touch. In the darkness above, Thunder Ridge stood witness as she began to rebuild herself piece by piece into something new. Not quite the widow, not quite the gunslinger, but something forged in the space between civilization and savagery. The moon climbed higher as Jackson's voice carried her back through years of forgotten lessons, each word another step on the path she'd chosen. In Salvation Springs below, the Scorpion brothers slept unaware that their nightmare was taking shape in the mountain's shadow, guided by the hands of a man who'd once been the devil himself. Dawn found Rebecca back at her boarding house, her muscles aching from hours of practice with Jackson. The Colt weighed heavy on her hip, hidden beneath a long duster coat. Her fingers, usually dusted with flour, now carried the familiar smell of gun oil and leather. The transformation had begun, but with it came the doubts, crowding her mind like storm clouds over Thunder Ridge. The Scorpion brothers were already making themselves at home in her dining room, their loud laughter cutting through the morning quiet. Rebecca paused in the kitchen doorway, watching them. Caleb sat in Wesley's old chair, his boots propped on her clean tablecloth. The sight made something twist inside her, a reminder of the civilized life she was choosing to abandon. "Coffee, Mrs. Hawthorne?" Ezra called out, his young face split in a mocking grin. "Or are you too busy sneaking around at night?" Rebecca's hand twitched, muscle memory reaching for the Colt. But she forced herself to stay calm, to maintain her widow's facade. "Coffee will be ready shortly," she replied, moving to the stove. Every step was a conscious effort to keep her new rhythm hidden, to move like the baker of bread rather than the dealer of death. "Interesting times in Salvation Springs," Caleb observed, his voice carrying that perpetual undertone of amusement. "Deputy Crawford's still laid up with that shoulder wound. Marshall's been awfully quiet, and now I hear Augustus Jackson's been spotted up in the hills." Rebecca kept her back turned, measuring coffee grounds with steady hands. "I wouldn't know about such things." "No?" Jebediah Rattler spoke up, his voice rough as gravel. "Funny, seeing as how your horse's hooves were mighty dirty this morning. Been riding far, Mrs. Hawthorne?" The moment stretched like a drawn bowstring. Rebecca could feel their eyes on her back, predators sensing a change in their prey. She thought of Wesley, of his gentle hands teaching her to bake, to build, to believe in something better than violence. What would he think of her now? "My business is my own, gentlemen," she finally replied, turning to face them with the coffee pot. "As yours is yours." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her with new interest. "You know, there's something familiar about you, Mrs. Hawthorne. Something in the way you moved this morning. Reminds me of stories I used to hear years back. About a woman they called Ember." The coffee pot trembled slightly in Rebecca's hand as she poured their cups. Not from fear, but from the effort of restraining herself. One quick draw, 3 shots. She could end it now. But Jackson's words from the night before echoed in her mind. Patience. Precision. Justice takes time. "Those sound like violent stories, Mr. Scorpion," she said, carefully. "Not suitable for a widow's breakfast table." Luther Dawson chose that moment to enter, his quiet footsteps marking him as the professional he was. He noticed the tension immediately, one hand drifting toward his gun. "Easy, Luther." Caleb waved him down. "Mrs. Hawthorne and I were just discussing history. Ancient history, isn't that right?" Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "The past is best left buried, Mr. Scorpion, along with those who can't let it rest." The threat hung in the air between them, subtle as a snake in the grass. Caleb's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. "Indeed it is, Mrs. Hawthorne. Indeed it is." After they left for the saloon, Martha arrived to find Rebecca standing in her kitchen, staring at the coffee cups left scattered on her once pristine table. You've started down the path, Martha observed quietly. I can see it in your bearing. Jackson's been teaching me again, Rebecca admitted. Or perhaps just reminding me. But, Rebecca picked up Wesley's photograph from the mantel, studying his kind face. 3 years, Martha. 3 years of building something clean and good, of proving that violence isn't the only way. If I do this, if I become her again. What was it all for? Martha stepped closer, her hand gentle on Rebecca's arm. Perhaps it was preparation, teaching you that there's more than one kind of strength. The woman you were only knew how to destroy. The woman you are now knows how to build, how to heal, how to protect. And if I can't be both, you already are. Martha's voice carried the certainty of one who had seen too much of both healing and hurting. The question isn't whether you can be both women, it's whether you can accept that both are needed. Sometimes the only way to protect what's good is to remember how to be dangerous. Rebecca's fingers traced the outline of the Colt under her duster. The weight of it felt both foreign and familiar, like returning to a homeland changed by time and weather. She thought of Ezra's laugh as Deputy Crawford fell, of Caleb's boots on her clean tablecloth, of the fear in Pearl Sullivan's eyes. I told myself I was doing this for justice, she whispered. But sometimes in the dark, I can feel the old hunger, the desire to make them suffer as Wesley suffered, as I suffered. What if I start and can't stop? What if Ember burns everything, even the good parts? Martha picked up one of the scattered coffee cups, examining the dregs left behind. You know what I see? I see a woman strong enough to build a new life from ashes, strong enough to help others when she could have hidden away. That strength doesn't vanish just because you pick up a gun again. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky remained clear. Rebecca moved to the window, watching the Scorpion brothers emerge from the saloon. They moved like wolves among sheep, confident in their power over the town. But wolves, she remembered, weren't the only predators in nature. Jackson says I need to find balance, she said finally, between the widow and the warrior, between justice and revenge. And what do you say? Rebecca touched Wesley's wedding band, still hanging from its chain. I say it's time to show them why they called me Ember, not because I burned everything down, but because even the smallest spark, properly placed, can start a cleansing fire. Above Salvation Springs, Thunder Ridge stood eternal, indifferent to the struggles of those in its shadow. But perhaps, Rebecca thought, it had seen enough of evil men destroying good things. Perhaps it was time for something different, a woman who knew both creation and destruction, ready to use both in defense of what mattered. The old silver mine echoed with gunshots as the first rays of sun touched Thunder Ridge. Rebecca stood in the shadow of the mine entrance, her Colt smoking in her hand, while 6 tin cans lay scattered in the dust. Not one remained standing on the fence post where Jackson had placed them. Again, Jackson commanded, already moving to reset the targets. Faster this time, remember, the Scorpions won't stand still like tin cans. Rebecca reloaded with practiced efficiency, her movements growing smoother with each repetition. The past 3 days had burned away her hesitation like morning fog in the desert sun. The widow's gentle hands had remembered their older purpose, calluses forming where once there had been flower burns. You're still thinking too much, Jackson observed, stepping back from the targets. Still trying to be both women at once. Let go of the widow. She can come back when this is done. Rebecca's jaw tightened. The widow is what keeps me human, Jackson. What stops me from becoming like them. The widow is what'll get you killed. Jackson's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. You can't serve 2 masters in a gunfight. Can't be thinking about fresh-baked bread when the lead's flying. The next 6 shots rang out before he finished speaking. This time the cans didn't just fall. They flew apart, torn by bullets placed with surgical precision. Rebecca lowered her smoking gun, her eyes cold as mountain frost. What are you looking for? Jackson smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Getting there. Now let's see you do it from horseback. The morning wore on, each exercise more demanding than the last. Rebecca rode, shot, reloaded, again and again, until her arms ached and her horse was lathered with sweat. Jackson pushed her relentlessly, recreating every dirty trick the Scorpions might try, every situation that could go wrong. "They'll try to separate you," he called out, as she galloped past. "Pick you off one by one. Caleb's smart. He'll have Luther Dawson watching your back door while they come through the front." Rebecca wheeled her horse, firing at targets Jackson had hidden among the rocks. Each shot found its mark, but he wasn't satisfied. "Faster! You're still measuring each shot like you're cutting pie. Let it flow. Let Ember take over." "Ember got people killed," Rebecca snapped, but her next series of shots came quicker, more instinctive. "Ember survived," Jackson countered. "The Widows never faced men like the Scorpions. Not really. She's played at being harmless for so long she's forgotten that sometimes survival means being the biggest threat in the room." The words struck home like bullets. Rebecca dismounted, her boots raising dust clouds in the morning light. "You think I've forgotten?" Her voice was soft, dangerous. "You think I don't remember every life I took? Every time I chose violence over mercy?" Jackson approached her slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I think you remember too well. That's your problem. You're so afraid of being that woman again that you'd rather die as the widow than live as both. And what if being both isn't possible?" The question that had haunted her nights finally emerged. What if starting down this path means losing everything I built, everything Wesley helped me become? Jackson's laugh was harsh as canyon winds. "You think Wesley made you civilized? Girl, he just showed you that civilization was worth fighting for, worth killing for when men like the Scorpions come to destroy it." He drew his own gun then, faster than she'd seen him move in years. Rebecca's Colt cleared leather before conscious thought, muscle memory responding to threat. They stood frozen, guns leveled at each other's hearts. "See that?" Jackson's voice was quiet now. "That's not the Widow. That's not even Ember. That's just you. All of you. The skill and the soul, the violence and the mercy, all working together. That's what you need to be." Rebecca held her stance for a long moment, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. Finally, she lowered her gun. "How do I balance it? How do I keep the mercy without losing the edge?" "You don't balance it," Jackson holstered his weapon. "You use both. The Widow's patience, her understanding of people, that's what'll tell you when to act. Ember's skills, her willingness to do what's necessary, that's what'll keep you alive when you do." He moved to his saddlebags, pulling out a worn leather journal. "I've been watching the Scorpions for months. Their patterns, their habits, their weaknesses. Caleb's smart, but proud. Ezra's quick, but reckless. Jebediah follows orders, but drinks too much by noon. And Luther's the real danger," Rebecca finished. "The professional. Just like you used to be." Jackson handed her the journal. "Study it. Know them better than they know themselves. Then use everything you are, widow and warrior both, to take them down." Rebecca opened the journal, scanning pages of detailed observations. "This is why you were ready when I came looking for you." "Been waiting 3 years," Jackson admitted, "watching you build your new life, wondering if you'd ever need the old skills again. Hoping you wouldn't, but knowing better." The sun had climbed high over Thunder Ridge, turning the morning cold to desert heat. Rebecca stripped off her duster, letting the gun belt ride open on her hip. No more hiding, no more pretense. "Again," she said, moving back to her horse. "Show me everything they might try, everything they might expect." Her voice carried new conviction. The Widow's gentleness wrapped around Ember's steel core. "I need to be better than they are, better than I was." Jackson nodded, satisfaction glinting in his eyes. "Now you're ready to learn. Now you're ready to become what you need to be." The rest of the day passed in a blur of gunfire and dust, each shot bringing Rebecca closer to the woman she was becoming. Not widow, not warrior, but something new. something forged in the heat of necessity and tempered by the knowledge of what civilization truly cost to protect. In Salvation Springs below, the Scorpion brothers went about their business, unaware that their nightmare was taking shape in the mountains above. Soon they would learn what happened when you pushed a woman too far, when you forced her to remember who she'd been, and discover who she could become. The evening sun painted Salvation Springs in shades of blood and gold when Rebecca returned to town. A week of training with Jackson had changed her in ways visible only to those who knew where to look. The widow's dress was back, but beneath it the Colt rode in a hidden holster, ready. Her gentle smile remained, but her eyes had grown harder, more watchful. She found Salvation Springs changed as well. The Scorpion brothers had been busy in her absence. Josiah Winchester's bank now had 2 of their men lounging outside, protecting it from threats that hadn't existed before their arrival. Pearl Sullivan's store displayed a fresh painted sign advertising "New Management," though Pearl herself was nowhere to be seen. "They work fast," Martha observed, falling into step beside Rebecca as she walked down the main street. 3 businesses are already paying protection money, more to follow, they say. And the marshal? Helpless, with Deputy Crawford still healing and no proof of wrongdoing. Martha's voice trailed off as Ezra Scorpion emerged from the saloon, followed by 2 ranch hands Rebecca didn't recognize. "Well, look who's back," Ezra called out, his young face flushed with whiskey and power. "Our mysterious widow returned from her travels. Find what you were looking for up in the hills?" Rebecca kept walking, maintaining the widow's measured pace even as Ember's instincts cataloged distances, angles, threats. "Just needed some time to think, Mr. Scorpion. The town's changed while I was gone." "Change is coming to your place too," Ezra grinned, stepping into her path. "Caleb's been thinking your boarding house could use some protection, dangerous times after all." Martha's hand tightened on Rebecca's arm, but Rebecca remained still, studying Ezra with new eyes. Jackson's lessons echoed in her mind. The youngest is the weakest link. Quick to anger, slow to think. Use that. Protection? Rebecca's voice carried just a hint of tremor, practiced vulnerability masking deadly intent. "But surely my little boarding house isn't worth your attention." "Oh, it's worth plenty." Ezra moved closer, alcohol making him bold, especially with such a pretty widow running it. Never know what kind of trouble might come calling. The ranch hand snickered, spreading out to flank them. Rebecca noted their positions automatically, marking them as amateurs. Their gun belts were too new, their stances all wrong. Not real threats. Just local boys playing at being dangerous. "I've managed well enough so far," Rebecca said softly, letting her hand drift toward her hidden holster. "But perhaps we should discuss this with your brother? Caleb seems the business-minded one." Ezra's face darkened at the implied slight. "I handle my own business, woman, and right now, my business is making sure you understand how things work now." He reached for her arm, fingers grasping empty air as Rebecca stepped aside with fluid grace. The widow's skirt swirled, concealing the draw until the Colt's barrel pressed cold against Ezra's ribs. "I understand perfectly." Rebecca's voice changed, Ember's steel showing through the widow's silk. "The question is, do you?" The ranch hands fumbled for their guns, but Martha's derringer appeared from her medical bag, covering them with professional efficiency. "I wouldn't," she advised calmly. "The lady's not alone." Ezra's face had gone pale, recognition finally dawning in his eyes. You're her. The one they used to talk about. The one they called Ember," Rebecca finished for him, her smile sharp as a blade. "Though these days, I prefer Mrs. Hawthorne. Now, here's how this is going to work. You're going to turn around, walk back to your brothers, and deliver a message. They'll kill you for this," Ezra whispered, but fear had replaced the arrogance in his voice. "No." Rebecca pressed the gun harder against his ribs. "They'll try. But first, you'll tell them this. Salvation Springs is under new protection. Mine. Any business owner who's been threatened, any money taken by force, that ends now. Or the next time we meet, I won't be so gentle." She stepped back, the colt vanishing beneath her skirts as smoothly as it had appeared. Ezra stumbled away, his face a mix of fear and fury. The ranch hands followed, trying to maintain some dignity in retreat. That was dangerous, Martha observed once they were alone. Caleb won't take this challenge lightly. Good. Rebecca watched Ezra's retreating form with cold satisfaction. I'm counting on it. Sometimes the best way to draw out a snake is to step on its tail. They continued down the street, aware of eyes watching from windows and doorways. Word would spread fast. The widow wasn't what she seemed. The game was changing. Jackson taught you well, Martha noted. A week ago, you would have handled that differently. A week ago, I was still lying to myself. Rebecca paused outside her boarding house, noting the fresh scratches on her door lock. Someone had been searching her rooms. Trying to be only half of who I am. But the widow and Ember, they're both me. Both are necessary. The sound of running feet made them turn. Pearl Sullivan approached, her face flushed with excitement. Is it true? Did you really stand up to them? Are you really... Really what, Pearl? The one they've been whispering about. The one who used to hunt men like them before. Pearl glanced at the black dress, understanding dawning in her eyes. Rebecca straightened, letting them all see both women she had become. The widow's dignity wrapped around Ember's dangerous grace. What I used to be doesn't matter. What matters is what I am now. Someone who protects what's worth protecting. Thunder rumbled in the distance as storm clouds gathered over Thunder Ridge. Rebecca climbed her porch steps, each movement measured and precise. The first shot had been fired, not with bullets, but with intention. Now would come the hard part, waiting for Caleb's response, preparing for the storm she had deliberately provoked. Inside, she removed Wesley's photograph from the mantel, touching it gently. I'm not just destroying this time, she whispered to his remembered smile. I'm protecting what we built. What you taught me was worth fighting for. The storm broke over Salvation Springs, rain washing the streets clean. Tomorrow would bring consequences, but for now Rebecca allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The test had been passed. Ember and the widow had worked together, neither overwhelming the other. She was ready for what came next. She had to be. The real fight was just beginning. The next 3 days transformed Salvation Springs into a powder keg waiting for a spark. Rebecca moved through town like a ghost between worlds, the widow's black dress concealing Ember's deadly grace. Each morning, she baked bread and served coffee to her remaining boarders. Each night, she rode to the old silver mine, where Jackson helped her hone her skills to a razor's edge. Word of her confrontation with Ezra had spread through town like wildfire. Business owners who once hurried past her boarding house now nodded in quiet recognition. The fear in their eyes had been replaced by something more dangerous: hope. They're pulling their protection money back, Martha reported, sharing coffee in Rebecca's kitchen as dawn painted the windows gold. Josiah Winchester told Caleb's men they weren't needed at the bank anymore. Pearl Sullivan tore down their management sign. Rebecca checked her Colt's action beneath the table, the motion smooth as silk. And the Scorpions? Quiet, too quiet. Martha's face showed her concern. Caleb hasn't been seen in 2 days. Jebediah drinks alone at the saloon, and Luther Dawson's disappeared entirely. Not disappeared, Rebecca corrected, remembering Jackson's lessons. Hunting, learning my patterns, my weaknesses. That's how professionals work. As if summoned by her words, a horse's scream split the morning calm. Rebecca was moving before the sound died, the widow's skirts discarded for riding clothes she kept ready. She emerged onto her porch in time to see smoke rising from the livery stable. "Martha, get the water brigade," she called, running toward the flames. But even as she moved, she recognized the trap for what it was. The stable fire would draw everyone's attention east, leaving the rest of the town vulnerable. She changed direction mid-stride, cutting down the alley behind the saloon. Her instincts proved true. 2 of Caleb's men were slipping into Pearl's store through the back door, guns drawn. Looking for something? Rebecca's voice made them freeze. She stood at the alley's mouth, the rising sun behind her casting her shadow long against the dirt. The men turned, revealing themselves as the same ranch hands from before. Their hands moved toward their guns with amateur eagerness. "Don't," Rebecca advised quietly. "You've seen what I can do. Walk away now. Find honest work. This is your only warning." The younger one sneered, his hand closing on his revolver. "You can't watch everything at once, wait." His words ended in a grunt as Rebecca's first shot took him in the shoulder. The second man's gun had barely cleared leather before her next bullet sent it spinning from his grip. Both shots had come from the hip, too fast for the eye to follow. "Actually," she stepped forward, her voice cold, "I can." 3 years of running a boarding house teaches you to manage multiple problems at once. Now go, before I decide to stop being merciful. They scrambled away, leaving trails of blood and curses. Rebecca waited until they were gone before sagging against the wall, her heart pounding. The shots had been perfect, disabling without killing, just as Jackson had drilled into her over endless hours of practice. "Impressive," a new voice drawled from the shadows. "The stories didn't do you justice." Rebecca spun, gun raised, to find Luther Dawson standing at the far end of the alley. His own weapon remained holstered, but his stance spoke of coiled readiness. "Was this your plan?" she asked, keeping him covered. "Create a diversion? Test my response?" "Caleb's plan," Luther shrugged. "I told him it was unnecessary. Your reputation speaks for itself. Ember." The name hung between them like smoke. Rebecca studied him with professional interest, noting the way he balanced his weight, the precise position of his gun hand. "You're better than this, Luther," she said finally. "Better than working for men like the Scorpions. I knew others like you before, professionals who sold their skills to the wrong people. We can't all retire to run boarding houses." His voice carried a hint of amusement. "Some of us are what we are. And what's that? Tools, weapons, points of pressure to be applied where needed." He gestured toward the main street, where chaos still reigned around the burning stable. "Like now. You're here, dealing with me, while elsewhere." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "The bank." Luther's smile was almost sympathetic. "Caleb sends his regards and a message. Every action has consequences. Every shield can be broken." She was running before he finished speaking, but she knew she'd be too late. The stable fire, the attempted robbery at Pearl's, Luther's appearance, all carefully orchestrated to keep her away from the real target. The bank's front window was shattered, and inside, she found Josiah Winchester slumped behind his desk, unconscious but alive. The safe stood open, empty. On the wall, someone had carved a message: "Protection comes at a price." "Quite a morning," Marshal McCullough said from the doorway, his voice grim. 4 fires set, 2 robbery attempts, and now this. Almost like they were testing our defenses. "Not testing." Rebecca holstered her gun, her mind racing. "Proving a point. Showing that one person can't protect an entire town." "Can't you?" She turned to find Martha in the doorway, helping Pearl Sullivan support a shaken Josiah. The banker's eyes were already beginning to blacken from the beating he'd taken. "No," Rebecca admitted, the truth settling hard in her chest. "Not alone." She looked at each face in turn. Martha, Pearl, the marshal, other townspeople gathering in the street. But maybe that's been the problem. We've all been standing alone, waiting for someone else to fight our battles. Thunder rumbled over Thunder Ridge, promising a storm to come. Rebecca touched the Colt at her hip, feeling both of themselves, widow and warrior, unite in a moment of crystal clarity. "Time to change that," she said softly. "Time to teach this town how to fight back." The midnight air carried the scent of smoke and defeat. Rebecca stood in the ruins of her boarding house, watching as Martha tended to Jackson's wounds. The old gunslinger's breath came in ragged gasps, his shirt dark with blood where Caleb's bullet had found its mark. The copper smell of blood mingled with the acrid stench of gunpowder and burning wood, a familiar combination that took her back to darker days. "Should have seen them coming," Jackson managed between clenched teeth. "Got careless. Lost the edge I've been preaching about." Save your strength, Rebecca's voice was hollow, her eyes fixed on the destruction around her. The Scorpion brothers had been thorough. Every window shattered, every piece of furniture broken. Even Wesley's photograph lay in pieces, his gentle smile scattered across the floor like broken dreams. 3 years of building a new life, reduced to splinters and shattered glass in a single night. The attack had come at sunset, when Rebecca was helping organize the townspeople's defense meeting at the church. Caleb had waited until she was surrounded by civilians, until her hands were tied by the presence of innocent lives. Then his men had struck here, at her home, where Jackson had been waiting to meet her. The timing had been perfect, a professional's approach that spoke of Luther Dawson's influence. "How bad?" she asked Martha, though she could read the answer in the doctor's grim expression. The lamplight cast harsh shadows across Martha's face, aging her 10 years in a moment. "Bad enough," Martha replied softly, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. "The bullet's deep, lodged near his spine. He needs more than I can do here with just my medical bag." Rebecca's hands clenched into fists, the warrior in her screaming for immediate vengeance. But the widow remembered other losses, other rushed reactions that led to tragedy. The weight of her colt seemed to grow heavier, demanding action. "Can he be moved?" "Carefully. The mission hospital in Thunder Creek—" "No hospitals," Jackson interrupted, his voice stronger but rough with pain. "They'll be watching the roads, all of them. Caleb's too smart to leave an escape route." "Then we'll make them watch the wrong roads." Marshal McCullough stepped through the ruined doorway, his face dark with anger. His badge caught the lamplight, a reminder of law and order that seemed tragically inadequate in the face of such violence. "I can get him there, but you'll have to provide a distraction." Rebecca nodded, already calculating angles and options. But before she could speak, more footsteps announced new arrivals. Pearl Sullivan entered, followed by Josiah Winchester and a dozen other townspeople. Their faces showed a mixture of horror and determination. Some carried rifles, others brandished tools as makeshift weapons. Citizens turned warriors by necessity. "We heard the shooting," Pearl said, her gray hair disheveled from running. "Came as soon as we could, Rebecca. We're so sorry." "Don't be sorry." Rebecca cut her off harder than she intended. "Be angry. Be ready. This is what happens when we try to stand against men like them. This is the price of defiance." "Then we'll stand together." Josiah stepped forward, his bruises from the bank robbery still visible beneath his eye. "Just like you've been teaching us. One person can be broken, but together—" But Rebecca was already shaking her head, grief turning to cold fury in her chest. The familiar weight of violence settled around her shoulders like an old coat. "Number, I was wrong. Teaching you to defend yourselves. I just made you targets, made everyone I care about a target. Their blood is on my hands." "That's not true." Martha looked up from Jackson's wounds, her hands red with his blood. "You gave us hope?" "Hope?" Rebecca gestured at the destruction around them, her voice rising. "Look what hope got us. Look what it got him. Look at every broken thing in this room, This is what hope looks like when it meets reality." She knelt beside Jackson, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I should never have involved any of you. This is between me and them now. It always was." "Rebecca." Jackson's hand found hers, his grip still strong despite his wounds. Blood seeped through Martha's bandages as he shifted. Don't do this. Don't let them make you into what they are. Everything you built here. It matters." "What are they?" She stood, drawing the Colt with deadly grace. The familiar weight centered her, grounded her in what she knew to be true. "They're survivors, killers. That's the only language they understand. And I've been fooling myself, thinking I could be something different, thinking I could wash the blood from my hands with bread flour and good intentions." The townspeople shifted uneasily, seeing Ember emerge fully for the first time. The widow's compassion burned away, leaving only the warrior's cold purpose. This was the woman from the whispered stories, the one who had left a trail of bodies across 3 territories before finding redemption in Wesley's love. "Mrs. Hawthorne." Marshal McCullough's voice carried a warning. His hand rested on his own gun, though whether to stop her or support her remained unclear. "Don't throw away everything you've built, everything you've taught us. This town needs the woman you become, not the one you used to be." But Rebecca was already moving, checking her ammunition with mechanical precision. Each bullet slid into place with a click that sounded like destiny. What I built was a lie, a dream that died with Wesley. Time to wake up and remember what the world really is, a place where violence is the only truth that lasts. "Rebecca, please." Martha stood, blood on her hands from tending Jackson. "This isn't you. Not anymore. You're more than what they made you." "No." Rebecca's laugh was bitter as winter wind, empty as a gunfighter's promises. "Look around, Martha. This is exactly who I am. Everything I touch turns to violence. Everyone I try to protect gets hurt. Well, no more." She turned to the gathered townspeople, her eyes hard as frozen amber. "Go home. Lock your doors. What happens next isn't your fight." "The hell it isn't." Pearl stepped forward, anger overcoming fear. "This is our town too. You showed us how to stand up to them." "I showed you how to get killed." Rebecca's voice cracked like a whip. "Jackson's dying because of me. My home is destroyed because of me. Because I forgot what I really am. Not a protector, not a teacher, but a weapon. And it's time I stopped pretending otherwise." She moved to the door, her black dress rippling like storm clouds. The townspeople parted before her, seeing something dangerous and familiar in her bearing. The return of the killer they'd heard whispered about in saloons and around campfires. "Rebecca," Jackson called after her, his voice weaker. "Remember, balance. Remember who you really are. Both sides. Make you whole." She paused at the threshold, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. For a moment, her shoulders trembled with some unnamed emotion. Then she straightened, all softness falling away like shed skin. "I remember exactly who I am," she said quietly. "I'm the woman they called Ember, the one who burns everything she touches. And it's time the Scorpions learned why that name once made men pray." She descended the porch steps into the darkness, ignoring the calls behind her. Their voices faded as she walked, replaced by older sounds, gunshots, screams, the memories of all the lives she'd taken before Wesley showed her another way. Each step took her further from the widow's gentle world, back into the darkness she'd once called home. Above her, Thunder Ridge stood black against the stars, as unchanging as violence itself. Rebecca felt the weight of the cold at her hip, the familiar comfort of embracing what she truly was. No more pretense, no more attempts at redemption. The widow was dead, murdered, along with her dreams of a different life. Only Ember remained, and she had work to do. Bloody work that would remind the world why they had feared her name. Dawn found Rebecca in the old church graveyard, kneeling before Wesley's headstone. Her black dress was stained with dust and gunpowder, her hands raw from hours of target practice in the hills. She'd spent the night becoming Ember again, letting the killer's instincts rise to the surface. But here, in the growing light, something else stirred beneath the rage. "I thought I'd find you here." Martha's voice came soft as morning mist. The doctor looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes from tending Jackson through the night. "He's stable. McCullough got him to Thunder Creek before first light." Rebecca didn't turn. Her fingers traced Wesley's name on the stone, remembering other mornings when she'd sought guidance here. The Scorpions? Quiet. Too quiet. Caleb and Luther rode out at midnight. Ezra and Jebediah are still in town, drinking at the saloon. Martha paused, then added, "They're waiting for you to make your move." "They won't have to wait long." Rebecca's voice carried the cold certainty of a killer's promise. But even as she spoke, her hand lingered on Wesley's name, as if seeking something beyond vengeance. "Before you do whatever you're planning," Martha said carefully, "you should know. The townspeople met last night after you left. They're not backing down. This made Rebecca turn, surprise cracking through her warrior's mask. What? Pearl and Josiah organized them. They're setting up watches, sharing weapons, preparing for whatever comes next. Martha's voice strengthened. Your lessons didn't just teach them to fight, Rebecca. They taught them to stand together. Rebecca stood, dust falling from her skirts like memories. They'll get themselves killed. Maybe. Or maybe they'll prove that one person's burden doesn't have to be carried alone. Martha stepped closer, unafraid of the darkness she saw in her friend's eyes. Jackson woke briefly before they moved him, said something you need to hear. Martha, he said, tell her Wesley didn't love the killer or the widow. He loved the woman strong enough to be both. The words struck Rebecca like physical blows. She looked at Wesley's headstone, remembering his voice. Violence isn't strength, Emily. Strength is knowing when to fight and when to build, when to burn and when to heal. They hurt Jackson, Rebecca's voice wavered. Destroyed everything I built. No, Martha's hand found her shoulder. They destroyed things, furniture, photos. But what did you build? The courage you gave this town? The hope you planted? That's still standing. As if to prove her point, sounds of activity drifted from town. Hammers working, voices calling. Rebecca walked to the cemetery gate, looking down at Salvation Springs in the morning light. People moved purposefully through the streets, boarding up windows, setting up barricades. At her ruined boarding house, Pearl directed a group of volunteers clearing debris, while Josiah's clerks distributed rifles from the bank's storage. They'll get themselves killed, she repeated. But the words sounded hollow now. Look closer, Martha urged. See what you really built here. Rebecca watched as neighbors helped neighbors, as old grievances were set aside in favor of common purpose. She saw the young schoolteacher showing older men how to reload faster, using techniques she'd taught him. Pearl's teenage son stood watch on the church tower, Winchester rifle ready, fear overcome by determination. Wesley would have loved this, Martha said softly. A town choosing to stand together, choosing to build something worth fighting for. Rebecca's hand found the Colt at her hip, but for the first time since the attack, the weapon felt different. Not just a tool of destruction, but a means of protection. She remembered Jackson's words about balance, about using all of who she was. I've been a fool, she said finally. Oh? Thinking I had to choose. Thinking I could only be the killer or the builder. She turned to Martha, and something had changed in her eyes. The cold fury tempered now by purpose. The Scorpions are counting on Ember, on the killer they've heard about. They're ready for her. But... A smile touched Rebecca's lips, dangerous but not empty. But they've never faced someone who knows both sides of the coin. Someone who can fight like a killer but think like a protector. She started walking toward town, her stride purposeful. Martha fell beside her, recognition dawning in her eyes. What are you planning? The Scorpions expect me to come in shooting to let rage make me predictable. That's what Ember would do. Rebecca paused at the cemetery gate, looking back at Wesley's grave one last time. But the widow in me knows something better. Knows that real strength isn't about who can kill the fastest. It's about what you're willing to protect, Martha finished. Exactly. Rebecca's voice carried new conviction. Time to show them what happens when you threaten not just a killer's pride, but a builder's home. They descended into town together, passing townspeople who nodded in recognition. Rebecca saw them differently now, not potential victims to be protected, but allies to be led. Each face reminded her of something the widow had learned. Community, trust, the power of standing together. At her boarding house, Pearl looked up from directing the cleanup. Mrs. Hawthorne, we saved what we could. Started repairs. Hope that's all right. Rebecca surveyed the work, seeing past the destruction to the possibilities. More than all right, Pearl. Remind me, you still have that storage room full of your late husband's mining equipment? Of course, but good. Send someone to fetch it. All of it. Rebecca's mind worked with the precision she'd learned from both her lives. The killer's instinct for weaknesses merged with the widow's talent for preparation. And I'll need every mirror you can spare from the store. Mirrors? Martha's eyebrows rose. Caleb thinks he's hunting a lone wolf, Rebecca explained, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. Time to show him he's really facing a pack. But first, we need to make sure everyone knows their part. Gather the town leaders in the church. We have work to do. As the sun climbed over Thunder Ridge, Rebecca Hawthorne stood in the ruins of her boarding house, neither fully Ember nor completely the widow. She was something new, something forged in fire and tempered by love. Someone who could build and destroy, protect and attack. The scorpions had awakened both sides of her nature. Now they would face the consequences of their choice. Salvation Springs transformed over the next 2 days, becoming something between a fortress and a trap. Rebecca moved through the town like a spider weaving a web, each instruction precise, each preparation measured. The widow's eye for detail merged with Ember's strategic instincts, creating something neither could have managed alone. Mirrors in place along Main Street, Pearl reported, wiping dust from her hands. They stood in the church tower, surveying their work. Positioned just like you said, though I still don't understand. Desert trick, Rebecca explained, checking angles with a surveyor's glass. Light can blind a man as surely as smoke, if you catch him right. Wesley taught me that, though he used it for photography, not fighting. The mention of Wesley no longer brought pain, only purpose. His lessons about building, about protecting what mattered, had become part of her strategy. The town itself would become their weapon. Marshal McCullough arrived with news as the sun reached noon. Caleb and Luther are back, brought reinforcements, 6 riders, mean-looking bunch. They're holed up at the abandoned Turner Ranch. Rebecca nodded, having expected this. Professionals? 2 might be. Others look like regular muscle. They're planning something big. Of course they are. Rebecca turned to the map spread across a makeshift table. Red marks showed their preparations. Blue marks indicated the scorpion's likely approaches. That's why we're planning bigger. Young Thaddeus Buck Crawford, newly recovered from his wounds, pointed to the eastern edge of town. Got the mining charges laid there, ma'am. Thunder won't be the only thing shaking these hills when you give the word. The old Rebecca, both Ember and the widow, would have rejected such destruction. But the new Rebecca saw how creation and demolition could serve the same purpose. Good. Remember, timing is everything. Too early warns them, too late traps us with them. Martha entered, medical bag in hand. Message from Jackson. He's healing well and wants to ride back. Tell him to stay put. Rebecca's voice brooked no argument. We've got enough variables without adding a wounded man to the mix. She turned back to the map, but Martha wasn't finished. He also said to remind you, Luther's the key. Take him out early or he'll cause problems later. Rebecca touched the Colt at her hip, remembering her brief encounter with the professional gunman. Already planned on it. That's why I need you ready with that special mixture we discussed. The sleeping powders? Already prepared. But getting him to take them? Leave that to me. Rebecca's smile held shadows of both herself. The widow knows how to serve coffee just right. As afternoon stretched toward evening, more pieces fell into place. Josiah Winchester's clerks, now armed and trained, took up positions in the bank's upper windows. Pearl's teenage son and his friends, too young to fight but perfect for messaging, prepared their horses for quick communication between groups. Rebecca walked the town's length one final time, checking each element of their trap. The widow in her noted every detail. Loose boards that might creak, shadows that could hide defenders. Ember calculated angles, lines of fire, points of ambush. Together, they saw the full picture. It's a good plan, Marshal McCullough said, falling into step beside her. Better than I'd have thought of. It's 3 plans, Rebecca corrected. 1 they'll expect from Ember, all fire and fury. One they might suspect from the widow, defensive, protective, and one they'll never see coming because it takes both women to make it work. They paused at her boarding house, now transformed into their command center. The broken windows and furniture had been cleared, replaced by ammunition stores and medical supplies. On the wall, Wesley's damaged photograph had been carefully reassembled, watching over their preparations. "You know they'll come at night," McCullough said quietly. "Of course they will. Caleb's too smart to attack in full sun." Rebecca checked her guns one more time. The Colt on her hip, the Derringer in her pocket, both representing different aspects of who she'd become. "That's why we're going to bring the sun to them." As if on cue, Pearl's volunteers began lighting the special torches they'd prepared, slow-burning, smoke-heavy things that would turn night to murky day. The mirrors positioned throughout town would multiply their light, creating a maze of illumination and shadow. "You're not just fighting them," McCullough observed. "You're changing the battlefield itself. Wesley used to say that the best way to win a fight is to make sure it's fought on your terms." Rebecca watched the townsfolk move into their positions, each one knowing their role. "The widow in me understands preparation. Ember knows how to make it hurt. Together they make something new," Martha finished, joining them. "Something the Scorpions aren't ready for." The sun touched Thunder Ridge, painting the sky in familiar colors of blood and gold. Rebecca felt the change coming, in herself, in the town, in the very air. The widow's patience and Ember's deadliness had ceased to be separate things, becoming instead two edges of the same blade. "Get everyone into position," she ordered. "Tell them to remember what we practiced. No heroes, no one stands. We do this together, or not at all." As darkness crept toward Salvation Springs, Rebecca Hawthorne stood on her porch one last time. The weight of the Colt at her hip balanced the weight of responsibility in her heart. She was ready, not just to fight, but to protect, not just to destroy, but to defend. "They're coming," Marshal McCullough called softly from the street. "Riders spotted heading down from Turner Ranch." Rebecca nodded, unsurprised. "Good. Let's show them what happens when you threaten not just a killer, but a community. When you face not just Ember or the widow, but everything we've built here." Thunder Ridge loomed dark against the stars, silent witness to what was coming. The night wind carried dust and promise, and somewhere in the darkness, hoofbeats approached. The final confrontation was coming, and Rebecca Hawthorne, all of her, was ready. Midnight struck Salvation Springs like a hammer on steel. The Scorpions came in hard and fast, their horses' hooves thundering down Main Street, exactly as Rebecca had predicted. Caleb led the charge, with Luther and their hired guns close behind. Their horses' breath steamed in the cool night air, creating ghostly shapes in the darkness. Only Ezra and Jebediah were missing, still waiting in the saloon as their backup plan. "Now," Rebecca's voice carried soft but clear through the darkness, steady as a heartbeat. Pearl's son yanked a rope and the first trap sprung. Mirrors flashed, reflecting the torchlight from a dozen angles. The sudden illumination caught the riders in a web of light and shadow, horses rearing in confusion. Two of the hired guns were thrown, hitting the dirt hard enough to crack ribs. Their cursing filled the night air as they struggled to regain their feet. "That's for Jackson," Rebecca whispered from her hidden position, then raised her voice to fill the street. "Welcome to my town, gentlemen. I trust you're enjoying the reception?" Gunfire erupted from the bank's windows, precise and controlled, just as she'd taught them. Not trying to kill, not yet, but forcing the riders to separate, to take cover exactly where she wanted them. The shots rang out in practiced patterns, herding the attackers like cattle into a pen. "Ember!" Caleb's voice carried over the chaos, fury barely contained. "Come out and face us, or are you hiding behind these farmers and shopkeepers? The killer I heard about wouldn't need an army." Rebecca's answering laugh echoed from multiple directions, thanks to the careful positioning of her allies. The sound bounced off buildings and shadows, becoming something otherworldly. "Hiding? No, Caleb. Just making sure you appreciate the hospitality of Salvation Springs. We take pride in how we treat our guests. Luther Dawson, professional that he was, had already spotted one of her tricks. His keen eyes caught the glint of metal in upper windows, the slight movements behind barrels. "It's a trap," he called to Caleb, voice slurring slightly. "The whole town's rigged." The explosions cut him off, perfectly timed. Controlled charges in the abandoned buildings detonated in sequence, driving the riders further into the center of town. The blasts weren't meant to kill, but the noise and shock sent horses into panic. More mirrors caught the firelight, creating a disorienting maze of reflection and shadow that turned the familiar street into an alien landscape. "Getting predictable in your old age, Ember," Caleb shouted, but there was strain in his voice now. This wasn't the straightforward gunfight he'd expected. His horse danced nervously beneath him, sensing its rider's unease. "Oh, you haven't seen anything yet." Rebecca's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, the widow's gentle tones wrapped around Ember's deadly promise. "Tell me, did you check your coffee before you rode out? The one Luther was so kind to accept from my kitchen? Martha's quite the herbalist, you know." Luther's curse told her the sleeping powder was taking effect. The professional gunman swayed in his saddle, fighting the drowsiness she'd planned for him. His usually steady hands trembled as he tried to aim his rifle. One threat neutralized, just as she'd planned. That's when Ezra and Jebediah made their move, bursting out of the saloon to flank the town's defenders. Their boots thundered on the wooden porch as they emerged, guns drawn and ready. But Rebecca had planned for this too, and had counted on their predictability. "Pearl, if you would," she called, satisfaction coloring her voice. The storekeeper's steady hand pulled another rope. The saloon's front porch, carefully weakened during repairs, collapsed beneath the brothers' feet. They sprawled in the dirt, curses turning to cries of pain as hidden ropes snared their gun hands. The trap was simple but effective, something the widow had designed while Ember calculated the angles. Now came the deadly part. Rebecca stepped into the street, the widow's black dress making her a shadow among shadows. Torchlight caught the silver in her hair, making it flame like her old nickname. Her voice carried clear and cold in the torchlit night, carrying both warning and promise. "Last chance, Caleb. Take your men and ride out. Never come back. Or find out why they really called me Ember." Her hands stayed relaxed at her sides, close to her weapons but not touching them yet. Caleb's answer was a bullet that sparked off the dirt near her feet, sending tiny pebbles dancing. She didn't flinch. I didn't need to. The shot had told her exactly where he was, giving away his position as surely as a shout. "Wrong choice," she said softly. And the real battle began, erupting like a thunderstorm. Her first shot took Luther's horse out from under him, sending the drugged gunman sprawling into the dust. Her second caught one of the hired guns in the shoulder as he tried to aim at Pearl's position, his cry of pain echoing off the buildings. The third, pure Ember now, put a bullet through Caleb's hat, a warning and a promise in one. The town's defenders opened up in earnest, their positions carefully planned to create crossing fields of fire. Weeks of practice paid off as they worked together, covering each other with the precision Rebecca had drilled into them. She moved like smoke through her own battlefield, the widow's knowledge of every loose board and creaky step letting her strike from impossible angles. "She's one woman," Caleb screamed at his men, desperation creeping into his voice. "Rush her all at once. We can't let one woman beat us." "Am I?" Rebecca's voice came from 3 directions at once, thanks to Martha and Pearl's perfect mimicry. "Are you sure about that, Caleb? Are you sure of anything anymore?" More explosions rocked the street, these from the mining charges young Crawford had laid. The ground itself seemed to fight for Salvation Springs, dust and debris forcing the attackers to bunch together. The chaos was controlled, calculated, a perfect blend of the widow's planning and Ember's experience. Rebecca's gun rang out again and again, never killing, but always hurting. The widow's mercy guided Ember's aim, turning lethal shots into disabling ones. One by one, the hired guns fell or fled, leaving only the Scorpion brothers to face what they'd created. Jebediah broke first, scrambling backward on hands and knees, his courage shattered like the porch he'd fallen through. "This ain't natural. She's everywhere. She ain't human." "Shut up." Caleb fired wildly into the shadows, his legendary cool cracking like thin ice. "Come out and face me, Ember. Face me like a real killer. Or are you too civilized now?" Rebecca's voice came from directly behind him, soft as a widow's prayer, deadly as a killer's promise. "I'm not just a killer anymore, Caleb. Thanks to you, I remembered how to be both." He spun, gun raised, but she was faster. The Colt's bullet took him in the gun hand, sending his weapon spinning away into the darkness. His knees hit dirt as she emerged from the shadows, both themselves united in this final moment of victory. "That's for Wesley," she said quietly, the widow's compassion tempering Ember's satisfaction. "For teaching me there's more to strength than killing." Caleb looked up at her with hatred and confusion warring in his eyes. "You've gone soft, Ember. The woman I heard about would have killed us all without blinking. She would have." Rebecca's smile was gentle as the widow's, deadly as embers. "But I'm not just her anymore. I'm something better." She raised her voice to carry across the battlefield her town had become. "Marshal, they're all yours." McCullough and his deputies emerged from their positions, weapons trained on the fallen Scorpions. The night's chaos settled into the quiet of the aftermath, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of torches that had helped turn darkness into victory. "It's over," Martha said, joining Rebecca as the marshal began taking prisoners, her medical bag ready to tend friend and foe alike. "No." Rebecca holstered her gun, looking around at the town that had fought with her, defended her, helped her become something new. "It's just beginning." Thunder Ridge stood peaceful against the stars, witness to a victory won not by killing, but by combining the best of both worlds, the widow's wisdom and Ember's fire, united at last in one remarkable woman who had learned that true strength lies not in choosing between two selves, but in making them work as one. Dawn painted Thunder Ridge in softer colors than the night had worn. Rebecca stood on her boarding house porch, watching as Marshal McCullough's posse departed with their prisoners. The Scorpion brothers rode bound and sullen toward territorial prison. Their reign of terror ended not by a lone gunslinger, but by a community that had learned to stand together. "They'll be talking about this night for years," Martha said, joining her with 2 steaming coffee cups. "The night the widow of Thunder Ridge showed her true colors." Rebecca accepted the coffee, noting how naturally her hand moved now. No conflict between the widow's gentility and Ember's readiness. "Which colors would those be?" "All of them?" Martha smiled. "Just like the sunrise up there." The town was already stirring to life, people emerging to survey the aftermath. But there was something different in how they moved, how they held themselves. Pride had replaced fear. Confidence had overcome hesitation. Pearl's store was open early, her new sign declaring, "Protected by Salvation Springs" in bold letters. "Jackson's coming home today," Martha reported. "Doc in Thunder Creek says he's well enough to travel. Wanted me to tell you he's proud of how you handled things." Rebecca touched the Colt at her hip, then the widow's black she still wore. Both felt right now, neither fighting the other. "Proud that I didn't kill anyone. Proud that you found your own way, not his path, not Wesley's, yours." Movement at the end of the street drew their attention. Young Crawford was leading a group of townspeople carrying lumber and tools toward the boarding house. The night's battle had left its scars, but healing had already begun. "Don't suppose you're planning to leave now?" Martha's question carried weight. "Now that your secret's out, does everyone know who you were?" "Who I am," Rebecca corrected gently. "And no, I'm not leaving." She gestured at the approaching workers. "Look at them, Martha. They're not afraid of who I was, or what I can do. They've seen both sides of me and accepted them. How could I do any less?" Pearl joined them, carrying fresh bread and plans for rebuilding. "Mrs. Hawthorne, we were thinking, the town needs more than just a boarding house. Needs a place where people can learn to protect themselves, to stand together, like you taught us." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "A school?" "Of sorts." Pearl's eyes sparkled. "A place where the widow can teach civilization, and Ember can teach survival. Where both are valued, both understood." The idea settled into Rebecca's mind like a puzzle piece finding its home. She looked out at her town, for it was truly hers now, earned not just by the widow's years of service, but by Ember's protection. The main street still bore scars from the night's battle, but they were proud scars, marks of victory rather than violation. "It'll take work, Cuss," she said. "Finally. Building something new always does." "Good thing we know someone who's good at both building and fighting," Martha smiled. "Someone who knows that strength comes in more than one form." The morning wore on, bringing more people to help with repairs. Rebecca moved among them, offering both the widow's encouragement and Ember's practical advice. She showed young Crawford's sister how to bandage wounds, then taught the girl's father how to check his gun without seeming threatening. Each lesson carried bits of both herselves, natural as breathing now. Near noon, a rider appeared on the road from Thunder Creek. Rebecca recognized Jackson's silhouette even at a distance, though he sat on his horse more carefully than before. She met him at the edge of town, noting the approval in his eyes as he surveyed the scene. "Quite a change," he commented, easing down from his saddle. "The town feels different. Stronger." "It is stronger." Rebecca helped him toward the boarding house. "They all are. Turns out when you show people they can be more than one thing, they surprise you." Jackson's laugh turned into a slight wince. "Learned that lesson yourself, did you?" "Finally." She touched Wesley's wedding band, still hanging at her throat. "Took me long enough to understand what he tried to tell me. What you tried to tell me. That the world isn't split into killers and victims, warriors and peacekeepers. That the strongest people are the ones who can be both." They reached the porch as another group of townspeople arrived, led by Josiah Winchester. The banker carried building plans in one hand and a carefully maintained rifle in the other, no longer uncomfortable with either tool. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he called out, "we've been thinking about your new school. Though maybe we could start with the basics, showing folks how to spot trouble before it starts, how to build a community strong enough to discourage it. Figure you know something about both sides of that equation." Rebecca smiled, feeling the last pieces of her divided self settling into perfect balance. "That I do, Josiah. That I do." The day continued, full of work and planning, teaching and learning. Rebecca moved through it all with new grace, no longer fighting either of her natures. She taught Pearl's boy to shoot straight while explaining why he should hope never to need the skill. She showed Martha's niece how to bake bread while demonstrating how a rolling pin could become a weapon if needed. Each lesson carried the wisdom of both herselves. Each moment proved that she could be both protector and nurturer, warrior and builder. As evening approached, she stood again on her porch, watching Thunder Ridge catch the day's last light. The town below had changed just as she had. It was stronger now, more prepared but also more compassionate. It had learned from both the widow and Ember, just as she had learned from it. "You'd be proud," she whispered, to Wesley's memory. "Not of who I was or who I tried to be, but of who I've become, of what we're building here." Thunder Ridge stood silent against the darkening sky, but Rebecca Hawthorne didn't need its answers anymore. She'd found her own, in the perfect balance between black silk and gunmetal, between mercy and justice, between the widow and the warrior. She'd become whole. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.